150 tanks, each a 30-ton steel behemoth, had crushed the plains of Poland and shattered the defenses of France. Beneath their treads lay countless crushed resistances and surrendered white flags, and no force had ever been able to stop them. This undefeated German armored force was now cutting through the Caucasus Mountains, driving straight toward the Soviet oil fields. No one imagined that just 6 hours later, this massive armored fleet would be nearly immobilized. What stopped them was not Soviet tanks, not aircraft, not artillery, and not landmines, but 5 elderly men and a pile of horse manure. This sounds like a fairy tale, but next I will tell you how it all happened. Before the story begins, do you believe 5 people could stop 150 tanks? Write your answer in the comments, and by the end of the story, you will know the truth. In August 1940-2, the German armored columns were advancing toward Grozny. The Wehrmacht 30-7th Panzer Division was the elite of the elite among German forces. The soldiers' records were filled with veterans from the French and Polish campaigns, defeated armies, and burned cities. 150 tanks lined up on the mountain road, and the commander was Friedrich Meyer. Meyer was 30-4, already decorated with the Iron Cross, a man who knew neither fear nor hesitation. His subordinates privately called him Iron Face because he never showed any expression on the battlefield. That morning was unusually hot and stuffy, and even with the hatches open, the tanks felt like steamers. The tank crews were in good spirits, chatting and laughing while sharing rations and cigarettes. To them, this war had become a parade, with the Russians retreating steadily and the objective within reach. In another week or two they would be heading home, returning as heroes with victory all but assured. They were even discussing what they would do first upon returning home, some wanting ice-cold beer, others wanting to see loved ones. Quartermaster was already counting captured supplies, planning to rest properly in Grozny, while no one noticed the gathering clouds. No one imagined that this seemingly easy march was about to become a nightmare. At 10 in the morning, the first tank entered that gorge with nearly vertical cliffs on both sides. The cliffs were covered with moss and vines, and seeping spring water left dark stains on the rock faces. Meyer glanced at the map. This gorge was called Daryal, about 12 kilometers long, a shortcut to Grozny. He did not like this terrain. The cliffs were too high, making it easy to encounter an ambush. But the scouts reported no enemy forces ahead, and passing through would save 2 full days of travel. Meyer ordered full speed ahead, and 150 tanks filed into the gorge one after another. The roar of engines echoed between the cliffs, causing loose stones to rattle down from above. Tanked Reds ground over the muddy road, turning the already soft ground into paste. The air was filled with the smell of burning diesel and the scent of crushed earth. The entire gorge was like a giant beast swallowing its prey, the steel bodies slowly sinking into its throat. Meyer stood at the common tank hatch, his eyes scanning the cliffs on both sides. He noticed some spots on the rock walls that looked like man-made chisel marks, but he did not pay much attention. What he did not know was that above the gorge, 5 pairs of old eyes were watching him. Sultan, 60-7 years old, was the elder of this mountain village. Beside him stood Magomed at 60-2, Rasul at 50-8, Ibrahim at 60-5, and Ahmed at 60-1. 5 men whose combined ages totaled 313 years, and not one was under 60. They were not soldiers and had never received any military training in their entire lives. Sultan was a herdsman who understood horses better than anyone understood their own palm. He knew what weather made horses restless and what terrain made them slip, knowledge that would prove crucial. Magomed was a stonemason who knew every stone on the mountain, which was loose and which was stable. Rasul was a hunter who could track prey in a blizzard for 3 days without getting lost. Ibrahim was an old carpenter, skilled in his craft, but never leaving the mountains, familiar with every path and stream. Ahmed was an herbalist who knew every plant in the mountains, which could cure and which could kill. They had never left these mountains their entire lives, but that was precisely their greatest advantage. 3 days earlier, Sultan had sensed something while standing at the village entrance, looking up at the sky. Clouds were gathering in the west, and the wind from the valley carried the damp scent of earth. This was the sign of an approaching rainstorm, not just any rain, but the kind that turns mountain roads into rivers. Sultan had lived 60-7 years and seen this kind of weather countless times, observing and recording each one carefully. He knew the muddy road at the bottom of the gorge would become grease once the rainstorm hit, a nightmare for any vehicle. He also knew the Germans were coming, as the young people had long since evacuated, leaving only the old folks behind. Sultan called the other to his old house, closed the door, and poured tea before speaking one sentence. "The German tanks are coming through our gorge," he said, and the 4 men fell silent for a long time. Magomed spoke first, asking what they had, and Sultan replied they had the mountains, the rain, and horse manure. Magomed laughed, thinking Sultan was joking, but Sultan did not laugh, his face deadly serious. He pointed toward the gorge and said he had walked that road for 60 years and knew every inch of its temper. Once the rainstorm comes, the road will be slicker than ice, and no tank can stand regardless of its weight. Rain alone is not enough. They needed to make the road even more slippery, and the answer was horse manure. Horse manure mixed with rainwater is the most natural lubricant, slicker than any machine oil ever produced. The village raised hundreds of horses, and the manure piled up like mountains, now becoming the most precious weapon. If they spread manure on the narrowest and steepest sections and waited for the storm, it would become a slide for steel behemoths. The 5 men sat around the fireplace and began making their plan to transport the manure without being discovered. Sultan decided on a 2-step approach, first concentrating the manure at hidden points above the gorge before dark. The second step was to push the manure down the cliffs onto the road after the German tanks entered the gorge. Rassel raised a crucial question: what if the rain does not come? And Sultan replied with calm certainty that it would. This was not blind confidence, but 60-7 years of reading the sky, understanding every cloud and wind pattern. That evening, the 5 men began their operation, using horses to carry sacks of manure along hidden mountain paths. They transported the sacks to natural stone platforms above the gorge, hidden from view by shrubs and cliff shadows. They transported nearly 200 bags of manure, working from dusk until dawn without a single complaint. 5 men, whose combined ages totaled 313 years, carrying heavy sacks up steep mountain paths. Ahmed's knees hurt terribly with every step, but he gritted his teeth without making a sound of complaint. Ibrahim's back was bad too, needing to lean against a rock after setting down each sack, but no one said stop. Sultan walked at the front, his pace slow but remarkably steady, like an old wolf patrolling his territory. At 3 in the morning, the last bag was in place, and the 5 men sat on the stone platform catching their breath. Sultan pulled out a leather flask and gave everyone a sip of home-made strong liquor that drove away the chill and fatigue. Sultan said now they wait for the rain, wait for the Germans to come. The next morning at 10, the German tanks drove into the gorge while the 5 men watched from above. Meyer noticed some unusual features on the rock walls, areas that seemed darker and wetter, but assumed natural seepage. He did not realize those dark, wet marks were precisely the liquid seeping from the manure placed the night before. It took nearly an hour for all 150 tanks to enter the gorge, and Meyer ordered full speed ahead. But just then the sky began to change color as clouds from the west pressed down like a giant beast, blocking the sunlight. The gorge instantly darkened and the temperature plummeted as Sultan looked up at the sky with a slight smile. When the first raindrop fell on Meyer's face, he did not care, but when the rain became dense as drumbeats, he realized something was wrong. This was no ordinary rain. This was a Caucasus storm, coming fast and fierce as if the sky had been torn open. Visibility dropped rapidly as the gorge filled with mist, and tank drivers could only follow the tread marks of the vehicle ahead. Sultan chose the moment when the rain was just beginning to intensify and gave the order to move. The 5 men acted simultaneously, pushing the manure sacks off the stone platforms to cascade down like waterfalls. The modder mixed with the mud on the road, and the effect was even better than Sultan had predicted. The organic matter in the manure mixed with the Caucasus clay to form an extremely smooth layer, slicker than industrial lubricant. Tank treads could not grip the surface at all, as if driving on ice, and the first tank to slip was a Panzer III in the middle. Tank slid toward the cliff wall and crashed heavily, its tread breaking, completely immobilized, and this was only the beginning. As the rain intensified, more tanks began to slip, some spinning in place, others blocking the road, creating total chaos. Tank crews poked their heads out into the rain, watching their companions lose control one after another as fear began to spread. Meyer grabbed the radio microphone, his voice trembling with anger and panic, trying to order a retreat that was already impossible. The gorge was too narrow, slipping tanks blocked the way out, and 150 tanks were trapped, unable to advance or retreat. Sultan watched the chaos below, his face showing not triumph but tension, knowing the manure and drain could only immobilize the tanks temporarily. He sent Magomed and Ahmed to handle the gorge entrance, Rasul and Ibrahim to handle the exit, while he stayed in the middle section. Their mission was to create rockfalls, and Magomed, as astronomist, knew exactly which stones would fall with a push. When the first boulder crashed down, a cry of terror rose from the gorge, and the rockfall blocked the already narrow road. Rasul and Ibrahim did the same at the exit, and after several boulders rolled down, the exit was almost completely sealed shut. Now the German tanks could not move and could not get out, trapped in a stone prison of their own choosing. If you enjoyed this incredible story of 5 elderly men who stopped 150 tanks with nothing but horse manure and knowledge of their land, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing untold stories from history. Remember, true heroism is not about having the biggest weapons, but about having the courage and wisdom to use what you have, just like Sultan, Magomed, Rasul, Ibrahim, and Ahmed proved on that August day in 1940-2.